last time we started this look at your book, Unconditional Love, Unlimited Way of Being, at chapter 1, and talked about unconditional love. And you were explaining that unconditional love is something that's very fundamental to us, really part of our very being. And when I asked, are we embodiments of love, you said absolutely we are. And to discover this, we really need to start going within. So today we're going to look at the second chapter, which is actually called Going Within. And what I'd like to do is to read the first short paragraph to set the scene for it. Most of us accept the idea that we're physical creatures having a physical experience. We see our outer world and believe it to be real, while frequently ignoring our inner world and hidden potential. Yet, if we stop for a moment and quietly listen within, we will discover the true nature of our reality. We are thinking, feeling, rational and imaginative beings. We have thoughts and feelings, and through these we create the world we experience. Okay. Take it away.
Well, I really want to kind of pick up on the theme we were talking about in our previous video and discussing, unconditional love and understanding how it's a part of us, and really bring back the understanding, the recognition, the awareness that in our lifetime, in our journey, on our adventure upon this planet, it really is a very spectacular, wonderful, and truly incredible opportunity to live upon this planet and experience all the nature, the relationships, the interactions, the interconnections that being on this planet affords. And I think what has happened over generations and upon generations of, perpetuating, experiencing and then perpetuating limitations and doubts and fears and really kind of becoming so outwardly focused, as we often talk about, that we've really, in a sense, forgotten about the joy of living, the actual ability to experience life in its fullness, to be fully present in the now moment, to be fully in an awareness of love, a recognition of our own love, and to embrace and accept and be actually excited and encouraged and anticipating the life that we're living. So the whole process of sharing, through everything that I've done in the last couple of decades, has been to help restore that understanding, essentially because I came to that understanding myself, that I had been living a very narrow focused life, a very outwardly focused life, and really quite dull in comparison to what I'm experiencing now. It's quite fascinating to have this inner awakening, to have this inner understanding, to explore more of my inner world, and in that exploration begin to actually enjoy more of my outer adventure, more of my physical experiences that I get to walk through every day. And I really feel that this bringing our attention within is critical to our understanding why we're here on the planet, what our relationship, with one another is, what our relationship is with ourselves, and how to come from a broader, more holistic, more infused and excited and enjoyable perspective on life. So the unconditional love as a foundation is to begin to bring our attention within, our thoughts and our feelings, with recognize that creative power, our imagination and our willpower that allows us to create our world, not to be solely outer focused anymore. In fact, blending our inner creations and then enjoying our outer creations, rather than acting and reacting, as I so often say, about the outer world and having no recognition of our role in it, the part that we're playing. So if we actually look at, as we've seen, in this past 100 years, this past century, the tremendous change and tremendous exponential growth that we've had as an experience. There's so many more things to experience, so many more people on the planet. There's so many things going on that we've just never seen the likes of in the last few millennia. Really, at this stage, by grace of my own understanding, my own awakening, my own opening up, I can also say that it's time. It is literally time for all of us to awaken to our potential. We're at a point where some very amazing opportunities lie before us, but they will not be available to us so long as we dwell in fear and doubt, because fear and doubt will destroy. Yet when we come from a holistic approach, from an open approach, from a broad understanding, a collective approach, a collaborative approach, then even more can come about. When we're not competing for resources, we're actually sharing, then we can take those resources and build a foundation to where we can then explore even more about life itself, and not necessarily even on this planet anymore, because there's so much life teeming out in the whole galaxy and in the cosmos. I mean, the opportunities are endless. So really at this stage, and I look to the last 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, even the last 2 years, it's time. It really is time for us to waken up to our potential, recognize that, we are a creative being in this world. We do have power with our thoughts and feelings. We do have the ability to make choice. We do have the opportunity to live in the present moment. And we have grand imaginative potential, a potential that we have yet to even tap. As we often say in the scientific understanding, we use maybe 5% of our brain. Well, even if we were to move to 10%, that would be, astronomical in our abilities. But truly, what's keeping us from using 95 or 100% of our brain? We really don't know at this stage, and I'm sure part of why we don't know is because we have brought ourselves to such an energetic impasse where we continue to destroy, but at some point the destruction is total. Yet we know no bounds and no limits when we come from love. And that's the beauty of why I like focusing on unconditional love as my foundation in life, and why I encourage others to consider it as an opportunity for them. Because when we bring love into the very beginning part of everything we do, then love is what will be infused in all that we do. And the more we progress, the more love we will have as an understanding and as a flow, as in a sharing. With that, certainly when I started this, inner awakening and started to recognize the love piece, my love was not full tilt. It was not full breadth. It was not necessarily all that unconditional. And yet, because I've made it my desire in life, my intention in life, to continue to focus on unconditional love, I keep expanding my understanding. So by having my attention upon that which I want to become, i.e. unconditional love, then I become more and more of that every day. To me, it's a timeless journey. It's a never-ending process. It's a never-ending opportunity. So for me, I'm not concerned to reach any particular destination. I'm just satisfied with the fact that in each moment, I get to know more about me and the world around me. Mm-hmm. And in this series, we'll be exploring over these various videos what that really means, to go within, to understand ourselves within, and then also to begin to expand our recognition of all these other gifts and skills and traits and understandings and wisdoms and imaginations that we don't currently tap into or recognize, and how to take that energy and bring it back out into the world and truly bring about a very positive, peaceful, joyful, abundant, extraordinarily creative world for everyone, where we can all share. So in that, this is really why we're working on the unconditional love going within initially, so that we can actually begin to understand our thoughts and feelings, what they are made of, why they're important to us, and how we can transmute, transform, and move forward in a more positive direction, both for ourselves and for the world at large.
Mm. So you're talking about us grounding ourselves, really, so that we don't get swept away by everything that's going on in the world these days. And we ground ourselves in our being, and find the love that's there to ground ourselves in. And through that, beginning to learn to express that in the world, and hopefully having bringing a benefit to the world. So bringing this whirlwind of activity in the world into something that's connected with love, bringing that positive influence of love to everything that's going on in the world.
Especially if we recognize that and reconnect to the idea and understanding and the realization that the love is already within.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we explored in the previous video, it is already within. This is not something we need to seek in the outer. This is not something that we need to go find and obtain and somehow, you know, manifest from the outer world. It quite honestly is releasing all the limitations that keep us from the love that's already within us. And as we begin to understand our thoughts and feelings and how our limited thinking versus our unlimited thinking applies to this, and how our limited feeling applies in relationship to our unlimited feeling, you know, these are the things that we need to kind of understand up front as a way to expand our understanding of love, and then take the powerhouse of our mind and the beauty of our heart and blend these things together, and now create from a conscious standpoint rather than being externally focused and simply reacting to all the experiences that have brought us to the understandings, the beliefs, the limitations, the traditions, you know, all the suggestions, all the things that we react to now, because we're not actually thinking for ourselves. We're not actually coming from our core essence. We're not coming from how do we see life. And that was, you know, truly one of the big shifting points for me early on, was recognizing that I had my own creative understanding and my own natural ability and wisdom to bring to the world, that I didn't need to just respond to the world, that I could actually create in this world. And these are extraordinary times we're living in. And as I just mentioned, you know, that we're having this exponential growth. Well, we're also having exponential chaos as a result of that exponential growth. Mm-hmm. Because all these ideas that we've been passing on for generation, we have been passing along some brilliant, unlimited ways of thinking, some brilliant, unlimited creativity. Absolutely. We've also, though, been bringing about a preponderance of negativity, of unlimited thinking, or of limited thinking, excuse me, with that negativity, with that limitation, with that scarcity, with that, you know, fear and doubt energy. And since that is such a huge focus when we're externally addressing our attention, then that will also be more and more of our experience. And if we're constantly seeking for something outside of ourselves, if we're feeling separate from love, then we're in non-love, which is a doubt of ourselves, and leads to a level of understanding of fear. And when we're in that state, then we tend to perpetuate more of that fear and doubt in ourselves, because what we have within, we give out. What we give out is what we get back. We need to really kind of stop and reflect. We need to go within and begin to say, okay, love is there. I may not understand it, I may not see it yet, but I know it's there. And now that I have this reconnection to the fact that my thoughts and feelings are a part of how I create my world, that in fact many of the things I'm experiencing are being generated from my thoughts and feelings. And as I've mentioned in previous series, we've talked about the fact that, say, the building we're living in or the chair we're sitting on, before it was that material item, it was materials and resources. It was labor. It was ideas, you know, put together on blueprints. And yet before that, it was simply an idea. It was an imaginative thought. Somebody wanted to create that chair that way, or somebody wanted to create that building that way. And then they brought together all those things. They had the desire, the feeling desire to bring it into manifestation. And lo and behold, it becomes a physical item that we can interact with. That's how we understand that our thoughts and feelings are critical to what we're creating, and why it's important to understand the types of thoughts and feelings we have in any moment, and are these really, you know, typically speaking, we call them positive and negative, but really we can readdress that and say, are they unlimited thoughts or limited thoughts? Are they fearful thoughts or are they loving thoughts? Because these are things that we can more practically work with. And again, for me, it is so important for us to understand all of this in a practical nature, because only in that understanding can we actually use the wisdom that we gain from it in our own personal lives, in our own unique ways, because certainly there's no one way to approach this, because everyone's going to come from unique perspectives. But if we understand the mechanics, if we understand that which we all live by, the attraction of things to us because of the way we're vibrating, the way we're looking at life, the way we're perceiving life. You know, if we're coming from fear, we're going to attract more fear. If we're coming from love, we're going to attract more love. When we understand that as a fundamental part, and I didn't for most of my life until I started to wake up to this, then having this understanding allows me to reformulate how I approach the world, how I approach my own inner being, And that combination has, for me personally, made extraordinarily difference in the sense of the types of things that I experience on an ongoing basis now. Things I could not have even remotely imagined, distantly imagined, even as a vague possibility. They weren't there. And yet here I am living, experiences that are fantastic beyond belief. The interactions that I get to have on a daily basis with people around the world are just so extraordinary. That's what we get to have, is when we open up to our creative heart, when we start to come from our own way of viewing the world, then we get to create within this world for the betterment of all, because that is what happens with unconditional love. This is not a selfish path. This is quite honestly a selfless path. We have to take some time to understand ourselves, but in that greater understanding of ourselves, we begin to understand everyone around us. And where there was perhaps contempt and judgment and resistance and separation, what happens through unconditional love is there's embracing, encouraging, and compassion. Because we're giving it to ourselves, we're then willing to give it to those around us. It's an extraordinary event right now on the planet to be able to do this.
All right, so let's get practical and sort of a bit methodical about this. How do we sort of go within? What do we find? How do we deal with what we find in within, and hopefully find the love within?
Well, let's work with, since we're already aware of the thoughts and feelings, and we're aware of the unlimited thinking and the limited thinking. Let's go back to our childhood. Let's go back to an understanding of how we got here. In the briefest sense, we come into this world filled with limitless potential. We come into this world to in some way bring about our incredible gifts. And in that initial state coming into this world, we do command the attention. We do get all the love and nourishment, all the things that we necessarily need. And we're open sponges, because we do need to, learn from initially those around us how to function in life, how to get from the stage of, being the firstborn baby into the stage of being a toddler and crawling and then walking and then, functioning. But in those very initial years, we are sponges. We are literally open to all of the energy around us, because we are naturally, as children, curious. And we're curious because we want to know how to function in this world. And we know that we have tremendous gifts, even though we're not conscious of it, because as children, we're not as aware of our potential yet. So we're going through life, and we're in the beginning to absorb everything we observe. We're beginning to absorb everything we hear, everything we touch. We're intensely curious. And in this process, where we have this immense potential, and again, in our very early childhood, we explore through our creative, through our play, through our various interactions in a much more refined, innocent sense. We don't place lots of judgments on things. We can cry one moment and laugh the next. We move through those early years with that sense of creative potential, not fully aware of it, but we do act from this more limitless potential. And we start to absorb and reflect upon and notice, and then start to take in all those things around us. And things that are positive and uplifting and unlimiting certainly encourage us to be positive, uplifting, and unlimited. Perhaps because we are mostly focused on family, friends, and human interactions around us in those initial years, we also then tend to take upon and mimic and learn from those around us. And as we said earlier in this series, today we've talked about the fact that there's been a lot of perpetuation of limitation, negativity, doubt, fear, etc. So we start to take that on. And so we might actually have positive cooing, we might actually have encouragement from our parents, but we may also observe them fighting. We may also perceive them being very afraid of something energetically, because they're radiating emotions beyond their thoughts. They're not just putting out energy based on what they're talking about. They're also putting out energy based on the way they act, the way they interact, the way they react. And so we start to take on those. We start to mimic those. We go on up, in through childhood, taking on more and more. And the more we take on from those around us, the less we remember our unlimited potential. And this is where the fading begins to happen. Then we move into a time period we call our teenage years, where we start to want to reconnect. We want to become adults. We want to express ourselves in the ways that we came here to express ourselves, our gifts and our talents that are unique to us. And yet we're also struck by these limitations that we've started to take on via suggestions and teachings and trainings by others. We aren't necessarily encouraged to explore ourselves, explore our own unique understandings. We're not necessarily encouraged with life skills that we're talking about in these various series. We're simply just being taught how to conform based on cultural traditions, cultural understandings, community, family values, all these different things that are really perpetuations of a lot of non-think. A lot of people who are not stopping to say, do I still really believe this? Is this a belief that really fits my world? So we don't necessarily address it, so it gets passed on. And as children, moving into young adulthood, we start to recognize that there's some disparity between what we can do and what everybody else tells us we should do. And we kind of go in a state of rebellion in our teenage years where we're striving to become adults in our own unique identity. And we're also striving to remember a glimpse of that past, that childhood. And yet we're torn between all these values and the fitting in, the validation, the recognition, the acceptance of who we are in relationship to those around us. We move on into our adult years, early adult years, we tend to become more and more filled in with the cultural parameters. We tend to find ourselves thinking less about who we are and more about what we should be doing and acting and reacting more in the outer world. And depending on how our adult life goes, we might have moments of great creativity, coupled with moments of great despair, utter loss of, who are we, what are we doing here, and completely depressed over the fact that we're not really living, because we're so busy being and doing with the way everybody else wants us, to fit in. And then we come to, our late life, and we start to relax from some of those intense activities of doing and, being out in the world on our journey. And we start to reflect and contemplate all the things, all the gifts and all the opportunities that we didn't necessarily take advantage of. And we even at times begin to reminisce about our early childhood innocence. And, depending on whether or not we can capture that moment that we're talking about of actually going within and begin to accept ourselves and accept all our talents, we still have opportunity at that stage to embrace and begin to unfold potential. But unfortunately, the heaviness of the weight of the stresses and the suggestions and the having lived other people's lives are so strong that we tend to just fade away and transition into death. What would happen if we would actually stop somewhere in our pathway, it does not matter what age we are, and literally say, okay, I choose to find out who I am. I choose to find out what I truly think. I choose to find out how I relate to the world personally. And actually take time and take the opportunity to contemplate, the thoughts and feelings that I'm entertaining in my world. Are these my thoughts? Are these my feelings? Is this the way I see life? Or am I simply mimicking, reflecting back, or parroting back what everybody else is asking me to be like? And it does take extraordinary courage. It takes a lot of inner strength to say, okay, I'm going to unplug for a moment and find out who I am in relationship to the world, because it's important to me. I love myself enough to do this. I love myself enough to go within and find the love within, because I know that finding that connection to me will open up a world of potential that I may not be experiencing at the moment. I may not know what that is. I certainly didn't. But I was willing to go in and find out who I was, and still am. I mean, this is an ongoing process for me, because I'm always finding new levels of potential that I had not necessarily recognized the day before. The difference is that it has become a priority for me. It's become the focus for me. It is now the way I go about looking at life. And I think we need to understand the story of our life. We understand where we came from, think about the types of people we are around, the community we lived in, the nation we live in, the cultural standards. We need to kind of question all of these in relationship to who we are and how we see life. Because only then will we see that broader picture, will we see outside the physical time period that we're currently in, whatever stage we are in our life journey, whether child or early adult or later in life. if we can see that bigger picture, step out of our story for a moment and actually see the dynamics that got us to who we are right now, and then recognize what we're talking about, this potential, this unconditional love, this innate ability to create, who do we want to become? So there is a point where we have conscious choice. And I think this is where, the tool becomes, okay, we've got the unconditional love as a possibility, we've got the thoughts and feelings as a way to begin to understand. Now we're seeing the bigger story. Now we have to remind ourselves that in this present moment we have choice. In fact, it's only in this present moment we have choice, because this is the point where we can actually make a change in the way we think and feel. And it's something we do for ourselves, and yet the moment we do that, we also benefit those around us, because we're coming more from our authentic self, more from our potential self, more from our higher self, more from our angelic self, as we mentioned, as a way to look at that bigger, even bigger process, that we're more than just this physical body. That's when we begin to tap into, and can, in so tapping into, utilize this extraordinary energy that's in us all the time. We're just generally conditioned to be unaware of it, unconscious of it. Constantly focusing in the outer world and fears and doubts keeps us from focusing on our true potential. And we have a choice in that. We do not need to any longer perpetuate what's been passed down generation to generation. We have a choice. We have the opportunity to step in now, individually and collectively, and say, what do I think? How do I see life? What would I like to create in life? How would I like life to be for me and all those around me? And when we do that, we actually all do come from a same space. We want everyone to be happier. We want everyone to experience more joy and more peace. It really is the innate quality when we're coming from that essence of love that we are.
Well, how do we find what our potential really is? I mean, it must be vast and have all sorts of different aspects to it. And you say we could ask, how do I feel about things? Who am I? What do I want to do in the world? How do we kind of find a way through all that, rather than sort of being completely confused by where to go next? Or are you going to tell us this as we go on through the series?
Well, actually, we will cover it, and we've mentioned it in previous series. One of the things that happens in this initial awakening part, when we begin to explore ourselves, discover ourselves, and begin to stop the old momentum, the old inertia, and begin to build new ways of looking at life, new perspectives, more unlimited thinking, there is overlap. And in those initial stages, I think it's important to recognize that it will be somewhat chaotic even for us, because we're going to begin to recognize limiting beliefs and doubts and fears. We may not necessarily know how to release them or detach from them. We may not at those moments have the strength or the courage or the inner connection strong enough to fully say, okay, I'm choosing to live in love in this instance rather than fear. It is something that we have to cultivate for ourselves in our own unique ways, because even say, for example, twins that are brought up in the same household, in the same environment, same community, same nation, it is impossible for them to have identical experiences, no matter how closely they think. They cannot be in the same place, looking in the same way all the time. And they will both have their own unique strengths and gifts and attitudes about life, which they themselves have to cultivate for them, their own path and their own journey. And they are not always identical. Well, that's an extreme case where we're seeing two people that seemingly are so identical and so similar. Take it to the other extreme where we're living in communities where we don't necessarily even know our own neighbor, and everybody's living a very individualized, unique life. Where their childhood was, where their early adulthood, how they handled themselves during these formative years also plays a huge role into it. So in these initial stages, we need to just take the opportunity to stop and reflect. We need to become mindful of the foundation of love, in this case, mindful that we want to notice what kinds of thoughts and feelings we're having, and then remind ourselves, oh yeah, I have choice. What will happen, like anything that we cultivate, anything we nurture, it will grow. And so in those initial stages, I didn't have a clue either what my potential might have been. I have a master's degree in business. I was doing the business world. I was in management. I was in banking. I was in retail and finance over the years. I had no awareness of my gifts of being able to write or to speak or to unfold this understanding of self-discovery. Those weren't necessarily in my consciousness. However, the more I released fear, the quicker I released fear, the quicker I released doubt, the quicker I released limitation, limiting thoughts, limiting feelings, the faster I started to open up to ideas one day to the next. Things began to happen differently when I started looking at life in a more unlimited perspective. Then opportunities that were probably there that I never noticed were now more obvious to me. And because I had courage to take advantage of them, the opportunity to explore them, if somebody would have said prior to this in kind of my old ways of thinking, my limited ways of thinking, said, you could write a book, I would have laughed, because I had no relationship to my ability to write. I had no evidence of my strength at writing. I had no desire to write. It was never something that came easy to me. And yet, just a short couple of years after I started to unfold my own potential, here I'm finding myself writing my first book. And it came quickly. It came in 6 weeks. It was picked up quickly by a publisher. In other words, other people acknowledged it. And, when it went through an editing process, it had very little editing done to it. So, lo and behold, unbeknownst to me prior, apparently I had a gift of writing. I've thought at times of my ability to play an instrument, for example, not something I ever did in this lifetime. And I often think, well, if I would just actually put my attention upon it, might I be a good, pianist or somebody that could play an instrument or really understand music in a certain way and actually, bring it out in a beautiful way. There are lots of things that I yet intend to explore that I haven't thus far. And I look forward to potentials that I can't fathom at this moment. Even 2 decades later, I look at the potentials. Wow, I don't know what I can become, because the more I explore of myself, the more I find I'm capable of, and the more I find an affinity to certain things that really resonate to my heart. And so for me, it's getting up every day and creating my life from my heart and saying, how can I bring more love into this world? And that just happens to be my world. There's many, many ways for people to play this out in their own individual worlds that will be unique to them. They might want to bring about a very loving, teaching, and be an educator or a company. I mean, they might want to be, a wonderful judge or somehow involved in the judicial system, and yet at this particular moment, they have no credible evidence of their ability. And yet their heart might actually sing to them and say, wow, you could go do this. That's what we're here to explore. Our true gifts and talents, not the things that we took on because we had to, or we told we should, or we thought we needed to for survival, or any of these different types of things. We're talking about going back to and reconnecting to our very creative nature. And rather than trying to say, this is what it's going to look like, we've been doing that all along, unconsciously. We keep repeating our fears of yesterday into tomorrow. So we keep expecting life to look the way it did yesterday. We're talking about making a fundamental shift where we're saying, I don't necessarily need to know what tomorrow looks like. What I need to know, what I want to know, what I want to explore is, what creative talent do I have right now? What am I being inspired to do right now? What choices can I make that bring me to that understanding? Had I not taken advantage of choices that were presented, had I not picked up that first moment and said, oh, let me just try to write, that first little tiny baby step that said, I'm going to ignore the fact that I don't have any experience in this, I'm going to go ahead and try to do it anyway. And it came fairly easy, that first paragraph. Then I did a second paragraph, and then a third paragraph. And within a matter of a few weeks, a whole book was formed. No clue, except for putting one choice in after the next, and I continued on with it. Then I chose to say, okay, can I get this published? Didn't have a clue how to do it. I started finding all the ways to make that happen, and lo and behold, it did. This is how we develop consciously. And I think this is a very important piece we're talking about, is going from a rather unconscious way of looking at life, doing everything by habit, doing everything by rote, by ritual, thinking more about yesterday and less about this moment, not being fully present. These are how we perpetuate an unconscious way of living. We're talking about becoming very conscious, making very clear, distinct choices in our life, and allowing our own unfolding to happen. It's going to be unique for everybody. There's no one direct way, but if we take all these pieces and put it together as a greater understanding, I think each person will find their way naturally.
Well, this process of exploring our potential and possibly making fundamental shifts and a whole array of new choices is going to bring great changes, isn't it, to our lives? I mean, that requires quite a bit of courage and encouragement and support, perhaps. I mean, it's almost inevitable, isn't it, that our lives would change quite drastically, well, dramatically, for the better, one hopes. Come on, give us a bit of encouragement then in that direction.
In my personal world, things did change rather drastically in my awakening by making certain choices, because one of the things that I did is I left the business world that I'd known, and I started to live for myself.
This is why you're the banker these days, I think.
Yes, and I would have continued on that path. I would have continued on doing all of those things because I simply had no recognition or awareness that there was anything else. And I would have explored, one job to the next, one, aspect of the career, but I was more or less in that business world. And by making these inner choices and giving myself the opportunity, I opened up to a whole different creative realm. And I started to work with my creative abilities in completely new ways. And, circumstantially for me, and simultaneously, there were also changes in where I lived, lifestyle, friends and opportunities. They all did change. That doesn't have to be the way for everyone. We can still, have our family, our friends, our community, and have an extraordinary wake-up call and start to realize the love within ourselves. We're not going to abandon necessarily our family, our friends, and our community. What we're going to do is start to interact with everyone differently. And that dynamic shift in consciousness and perspective will change our experiences, the quality of our experiences. It doesn't necessarily need to change every aspect of our physical world or all the dynamics that we put into place. It simply changes our perspective. We become a new person within our family, friends, relationships, communities. We become an empowerment point. We become a lighthouse. We become an embodiment of love that is possible for everyone. We become a model and example. We may still choose and find great joy walking amongst all the people we did and doing the things we did. It's just that now we're going to be much more detached, much more alert, much more in the present moment, and we're going to bring in an infusion of love and awareness and consciousness. We're not going to play the game anymore. We're going to start to make whatever we're doing beneficial for all. We're going to infuse kindness and compassion. Well, we can do that all along. It's just that we do need to recognize these possibilities and potentials in ourselves and cultivate them, encourage them, bring them out in order to have these experiences. So in a fundamental energetic sense, yes, there will be drastic changes. In an outer physical manifestation sense, it doesn't necessarily have to be cataclysmic, dramatic, or even overly eventful. There's an old saying way back when, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. We simply recognize love, and how we interact with people with love changes at the very core essence of our interaction with people, and actually encourages people in that sense. When we're doing it ourselves first, we actually encourage other people to find their own gifts and their own talents and their own strengths, and that's when the whole world begins to change. And we're seeing evidence of it right now. We're beginning to see lots of people that are waking up to their potential and waking up to the fact that they have now the understanding that they can think and feel differently about life. And they're doing it in their own world, and they're also doing it amongst each other. And we are beginning to see very positive outcomes of these fundamental changes, because we're beginning to let go of fear and doubt, which is really the next part we kind of want to touch on in the whole understanding. Is that we're talking about our thoughts and our feelings, and we're really saying we're beginning to understand how limited we've been in our thinking. Fear is the outer play of limited thinking. In other words, we tend to look at yesterday's and the day before yesterday's, and we think of, an experience that quite honestly and quite often is not even ours to begin with. We will look at our own personal experiences. There aren't usually that many instances of highly fearful events or highly traumatic or dramatic events that cause us to have, a fearful reaction, especially in any one given day. They're generally not, these extreme situations where we find ourselves acting or reacting in fear. We are, in fact, spending probably far too much time interacting with other people and their fears and reading about it and watching, movies and TV about it. And there's such a concentrated focus on fear, fearful ideas, impending doom, impending chaos, unempowerment, that we simply, in our outer focus on it to an extreme. If we focus on it, we draw it into our life. If we draw it into our life, we become it. If we become it, we give it back out. If we give it back out, we draw it back into our life. So we can see that what's happening is the cycle of fear is often from an external experience, and then we start to fear, and then we start to attract events that create more fear, and we perpetuate this circle. And what we're saying here is that we have a choice. We do not need to any longer entertain fear. Well, how do we stop that? Well, let's look at what fear really is. It's a thought. It's a feeling. It isn't necessarily even our thought or our feeling, which is somewhat ironic now that we begin to explore it more deeply, is that we are simply bombarded by the suggestion that fear is out there. Something is out there to get us. Something is going to, somehow ruin us, kill us, to, keep us from something. And we're entertaining that in our constant flow of thoughts and feelings. But if we simply say fear is not real, now we've done something rather amazing. We've given the opportunity to say that fear is not real means it has no energy. And in fact, if we don't feed fear, it has no energy. Love always sits in the background. We need to feed it too. In other words, we need to place our attention upon it, but it's always there. Fear, the moment we take our attention off, disappears. So now we have another tool. Now we have something to realize, like, wow, fear is not real. If I remember fear is not real, no matter what I'm entertaining, I can say, wait a minute, you're not real. Now we've just disengaged, and the moment we disengage from fear, what happens? We actually engage love. Because fear is really the lack of love. So if we're no longer in fear, we're now in love. And in the state of love, all potential exists. Now we have the opportunity for new imaginative ideas to come forth to actually overcome whatever we thought a moment before was something fearful. Fear, when rightly understood, is really self-doubt. If you actually think about it, when we think we fear something, we're actually doubting our ability to overcome it. We're actually doubting ourselves. We're not trusting ourselves. We're not connected to ourselves. When we are in a state of love, when we know our personal power, when we know that we are larger than all these things, bigger than all of these experiences, in the sense that we have potential, we have ways to solve. There cannot be a problem, for example, without a solution first. Problems can't exist without solutions. So if we actually look at the notion that fear is really self-doubt, now we're progressing closer to, well, then what's causing self-doubt? It's separation. Separation from what? Separation from ourselves. We've separated ourselves from our own wisdom. We've separated ourselves from our own love. And in that, we've created a doubt. We no longer trust ourselves to have the ideas, the solutions, the understanding, the strength, the courage, whatnot. So that doubt becomes fear. And then, of course, once we're in fear, we're outward focused. The more we're outward focused, the more we bring it all back in, and we're back into that circular loop. So what do we have? We have choice. It's simple as that. There's nothing else more profound than the idea that we have choice. We have choice in this moment, and we have the ability to stop and reflect, take a deep breath, and say, wait a minute. Is this fear real, or am I feeding it? Is my life an example of fear, or do I choose to live out of life? These are simple choices. It happens when we begin to wake up to our potential, when we begin to accept ourselves, acknowledge ourselves, realize that I might not know the answer today. However, if I give myself the opportunity, I will find the answer in the appropriate time, way, space, form. That's trusting self. That's acknowledging our personal power. That's recognizing our internal power, acknowledging our ability. That is self-awareness, self-encouragement, self-empowerment in a nutshell. We're acknowledging ourselves and we're moving forth in the world more and more conscious day after day, moment after moment. Which also, in this recognition of fear, it's good for us to recognize one of the other fundamental things that we do. If it's not necessarily fear, the other thing we tend to do frequently and a lot of when we're not aware of it or conscious of it or outwardly focused is judgment. We tend to judge constantly. Well, why do we do this? Let's go back to our early childhood. We started out looking at the world and trying to perceive how to function in the world. And over time, we started to be taught and shown, and then found ways, of course, right, wrong, good, bad, uplifting, not uplifting, unlimited, limited thinking. Challenges, because so many people have come from fear and still do come from fear, there's a tremendous amount of perpetuation of what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down, what's black, what's white, what's good, what's bad. When you start to move into unconditional love and you start to look at life inwardly and outwardly from more compassionate eyes, from more accepting eyes, from more embracing eyes, then we tend to slowly at first, and then it picks up momentum, we start to look at things differently, and we start to notice that things aren't necessarily good or bad. It's raining outside. One person says that's bad because it affects them in some way that they think that it's bad. And so we pick up on this, okay, rain is bad. Another person can look at it and say, oh, rain is good. My plants are being watered and it's bringing nourishment, and it's bringing, cleansing and all those types of things. You say, oh, okay, rain is good. Well, we build that up from our childhood and we start taking on everybody else's perceptions because everybody's got an opinion about everything. And we start to say what, for us, we think is good or bad. And it really is a preponderance of how we place our attention on limitation and unlimited thinking. And over time, we build a whole framework, a whole inner judicial system, as it were, a whole set of laws and rules about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. It's not until we actually start to go within and recognize our self-empowerment, self-awareness, our thoughts and our feelings, that we realize that all this judgment that we do externally is coming from within. In fact, it's all the points and places where we don't believe in ourselves, where we don't trust ourselves, where we don't acknowledge ourselves, we judge ourselves, we criticize ourselves. This is what we're doing within, this is what we're giving out. What we're giving out, we're getting back. So we're judging the world in a way that we're trying to initially think we're identifying from it, but in fact, by identifying it, labeling it, limiting it, we live in limitation. Judgment is a very strong form of limitation. There's a whole different world out there that says these things aren't good or bad, they just are. And we do come, and I will very honestly say that this did not come to me immediately either. This isn't something that I woke up one day and said, oh, I get the unconditional love, I get the self-empowerment, the self-acceptance, or I'm going to go out and, love the world. I didn't necessarily move out of that, this just is, they just are, it just is, understanding for quite a while. I think it took a lot of inner clearing, a lot of releasing limitation, doubt, fear, and judgment to get to a point where I started to realize and recognize things just are. People just are. In fact, the more compassion I had for myself, the more compassion I had for those around me, the more I let people be who they were. Because in fact, I wanted to be allowed to be who I am. So as I stopped judging myself in relationship to the world, and I stopped judging others in relationship to the world, this whole new understanding came out, and now I have far richer, broader experiences with everything. Now it's no longer, I look at a fork and I say, oh, there's an implement. Now I understand that if you put that fork under a microscope, it's teeming with organisms. And if I put it under a stronger microscope, it's teeming with atomic structure. Well, that same atomic structure, that building block of who we are, is in us. Lo and behold, there's a connection. The atomic structure and the way things interact on a molecular level, those are the same building blocks that are in us. Well, now I start to see the interconnection. I start to see the face of another as me. My smile is their smile. Their anger is my anger. Now all of a sudden I've got a connection that I didn't recognize before, and now I've got a place where I can make a different choice. And I can choose not to judge the experience. I can choose to allow it to be what it is. I can still observe. And this is where judgment falls off that line. We can observe things and notice things and say, well, I might choose that or I might not choose that. That may not be for me, and so we can make that observation. But there's a very different thing when we say that what we're observing is somehow wrong or good or bad or up. When we start to make all these judgments, when we start to limit it and say this is the only thing it is, we've just given ourselves a dose of limitation that we will somehow create more limitation in our life. Take a simple example. We go down a street. If we're riding a bike or driving a car or walking, we're pretty much focused in one direction as we're going down the street. And yet, while we're going down and focusing on that which is before us, 1 foot in front of the other or 1 mile in front of the other, there are things going on either side of us. There are things going on behind us. There are things going on above us. The sun's floating by and creating different shadows as we go along. There are things going on underneath us. We are so limited in our connection to the world around us. We believe in the five senses. We've believed in the five senses. And in fact, they only report such a narrow, limited, overall view of what's going on. We need to expand that. We need to go beyond that. We need to go and we need to understand how we've gotten here, what's in us, and then open up to even more potential. And in fact, that will be our next video, is going into more of that potential.
Good. Okay. So for the meantime, we should perhaps choose not to entertain fears anymore, not to indulge in fears.
Or at least acknowledge them for what they are. Acknowledge the fact that they themselves are not real and that we are the ones feeding the energy into them. And the judgment isn't necessarily, it's beyond an observation. That maybe perhaps that which we're judging isn't the full picture. And we begin to question things, we begin to notice ourselves in relationship to things. That's when we start to bring in broader perspectives. And the more we open up our perspective, the more we open up our attitude, the more we open up to love, the more love just naturally begins to permeate everything.
Good. Okay, so until next time, thanks very much.
Pleasure.